This man's name is Sniffer. His nose is 100 times more sensitive than a dog's. A passenger with a plaster cast on his arm boarded the plane. The smell made Sniffer frown. Sniffer quickly realized that this passenger had first wrapped his arm in gauze and then covered it with a layer of plastic. A tiny detonator was placed on it. The plaster cast was fixed on the outside. In order to increase the destructive power of the detonator, he specially attached a metal frame to increase the explosion pressure. It seemed that he wanted to become a bomb to destroy the plane. Sniffer's analysis took less than a second. At this moment, this passenger passed by Sniffer. The strong smell of explosives made Sniffer even more certain. Sniffer immediately called the flight attendant and said that there was a terrorist carrying a bomb on the plane. The flight attendant hurriedly called the captain. Sniffer told the captain that there was a bomb on the plane. The passenger in seat 32C had a plaster cast on his arm. There was an explosive hidden inside that was powerful enough to destroy a building. The plane would probably fall apart in an instant, so they absolutely couldn't cut the wings. The captain looked at the other passenger and saw that the man didn't look like a terrorist. He had a cast on his arm and looked pitiful, so the captain thought that he couldn't be the one carrying the bomb. The captain sternly warned Sniffer that every passenger had to go through security before boarding the plane, so no one could have brought a bomb on board. If you wanted to light a fire, you would need a lighter, so the lighter wouldn't have gone through security. If it was a remote-controlled bomb, the plane would lose signal and wouldn't be able to detonate. The captain told Sniffer not to cause a panic or they would call security to kick him off the plane. Sniffer was extremely angry. Sniffer had to explain that he smelled acetone peroxide. This was the ingredient used to make bombs. He absolutely could not be mistaken. Sniffer said that if the captain wanted to cut the wings, all 208 passengers on the plane would die. The captain and the flight attendant looked at each other. There was a mockery on their faces. The captain said that Sniffer did not have any evidence. Sniffer only relied on his sense of smell to determine that there was a bomb on the plane. The captain said that Sniffer thought he was a sniffer dog. Sniffer sighed and did not continue to explain. Sniffer only said that 35 minutes ago, the two of them had done it twice in the cockpit. The two were stunned because Sniffer had hit the nail on the head. They did not know that Sniffer's nose was 100 times sharper than a dog's. This time, the captain no longer doubted Sniffer's sense of smell. He hurriedly went to report to the police. Sniffer had successfully prevented a terrorist attack. However, Sniffer's ability did not stop there. Sniffer had just returned home when he received a phone call from his ex-wife saying that his son Alex was selling marijuana at school because the principal wanted to expel Alex. Sniffer rushed to school. The principal coldly said that Alex and 3 other students were high on drugs in the garage. The principal found marijuana on him. According to school regulations, the principal not only expelled them but also had to send them to juvenile court to serve time. The principal also warned all students to absolutely become like Alex. Sniffer was not angry but calmly asked Alex, "Is this marijuana yours?" Alex bowed his head without saying a word. In the principal's eyes, this was clearly an undeniable expression after being caught red-handed. Sniffer's ex-wife quickly checked Alex's wrist. She wanted to see if there was a hidden needle in Alex's hand. Sniffer said that as soon as he walked in, he smelled that Alex did not inject. Alex simply took a few puffs. Then Sniffer removed the nose clip and put on gloves. Sniffer then used tweezers to pick up the bag of marijuana and smell it. Sniffer wore gloves to avoid the smell being destroyed by fireworks. Sniffer smelled the scent of a second person on the bag of marijuana. It was a male student. Sniffer wanted to go to class to find out who had framed Alex. Principal chased after Sniffer, warning him as he ran. Sniffer had no right to search a student's school bag and could not violate a student's privacy. The principal said that Sniffer wanted to go to jail for a vacation. Sniffer ignored those words. Sniffer had to prove Alex's innocence. Sniffer went to the chemistry lab. At this time, the students were doing experiments. When they saw Sniffer suddenly enter, they were all bewildered. Sniffer walked in line by line. The last person who was also the target was the blonde boy. Sniffer picked up the blonde boy's school bag and asked if this was his school bag. The boy was very scared. Sniffer said that it was okay if he didn't admit it. Then, Sniffer dumped all the things in his bag on the table. Sure enough, 3 more bags of marijuana fell out. It turned out that he was the school's big drug dealer. Sniffer coldly said that the principal could now report it to the police. The principal was stunned. He almost ruined the future of an innocent teenager. Sniffer went to the door and suddenly turned around and told the principal that this was not real marijuana, but a low-quality fake. The students burst into laughter. The principal became a joke. Alex saw that everything was exposed, so he didn't need to hide it anymore. Alex said that he told his father that he often wanted to take the blame for his best friend, so he didn't say anything. But this was just a small matter. Sniffer's real identity was a detective. After Sniffer left the school, he received a case of a murder in a locked room. The victim was the owner of an architectural company. The crime scene was not disturbed. The perpetrator also didn't leave any fingerprints. Police officer Victor, who was in charge of the investigation, thought that this was a case caused by an acquaintance of the victim. Sniffer arrived at the scene. Sniffer first smelled the scent of the young police officer standing next to him. This young man was about 25 to 26 years old. He lived in a dormitory and liked to eat sour food. He was drunk the day before. He drank 56 proof whiskey. The young police officer was startled and said, "Are you following me?" Before solving a case, Sniffer always had to show off his skills. Otherwise, he would be considered crazy like on the plane. This time, no one suspected anything. Sniffer gently sniffed in the middle of the living room. The scent in the room transformed into different shapes in his eyes. This was his exclusive skill, scent visualization. When the scent entered Sniffer's nasal cavity, it came into contact with the olfactory epithelium on the nasal mucosa. This olfactory epithelium was like a sensor that would transmit the scent to the brain through the olfactory nerve. The olfactory nerve in the brain is equivalent to the processor responsible for recognizing scent information. The scent eventually forms an image before Sniffer's eyes. Sniffer deduces that this is a murder case. The coffee the victim drank before he died contained digoxin, a heart medication, but overdose will cause cardiac arrest. Sniffer smells cigarette smoke on the sofa. However, the victim has heart disease and never smokes. This cigarette smell must have come from the killer. Through the path of the cigarette smell, Sniffer deduces that the killer is a man, about 45 to 50 years old, who is quitting smoking. Because Sniffer smells that killer's right arm has a nicotine patch used to quit smoking. The killer stole a large bag of €500 bills from the victim. This type of money was printed by a bank in Berlin, because when they made the money, they used aluminum oxide compounds. Sniffer speculated that this was a murder for money. In addition, Sniffer also realized that the killer often went to a salt room, a room with walls made of sea salt. This is a characteristic of Ukraine. It can cause tracheal deviation, which is useful for people who quit smoking. Therefore, as long as they found this salt room, they would catch the killer. Sniffer finished his work and was about to go home when a stray cat fell into his arms. Sniffer was allergic to cats, so he immediately had an allergic rhinitis attack. Sniffer hurriedly went home to get medicine. At this time, Victor called and said that there were more than 500 salt rooms like this in the city. By the time they finished searching, the killer had already run away. Sniffer said that he was having an allergic rhinitis attack and could not leave the house for at least 3 days. Sniffer told Victor to think of a way himself. Victor did not have Sniffer's help, so he could only start with the victim's financial director. Sniffer had said that this case was related to money. After investigating, Victor discovered that the architectural firm had lost €2 million. The director said he didn't know how it was lost, because when the murder happened, he was at a bar exercising with 4 waitresses. He had a clear alibi. The investigation was at a standstill again. Victor couldn't take Sniffer to see a doctor. Victor wanted Victor to recover quickly so he could continue the investigation. But Sniffer hated going to the doctor the most. Every time he went, the doctor would prescribe some allergy medicine. It only treated the symptoms, not the root cause. But this time, the female doctor was different. She only used a flashlight to look at his nose. She immediately guessed that he often wore a nose clip and was allergic to cats. The nasal mucosa was irritated by the allergy medicine and bled. Sniffer was a bit surprised when he met someone as intelligent and logical as he was. Sniffer immediately guessed that she was about 35 years old and lived alone. She had no children or pets. She often swam in pools with excessive chlorine levels. She also liked to drink strong coffee and often ate round foods like chocolates. Although Sniffer had allergies and rhinitis, his sense of smell was still sharper than normal people. The female doctor prescribed medicine for Sniffer, treatment with the gas vibration method. Then Sniffer received a second murder case. The victim was the previous CFO. This person died from a gunshot wound. When the forensics at the scene saw Sniffer arrive, he shook his head. He did not believe that anyone could surpass his 20 years of experience based on their sense of smell. Sniffer only smelled the victim's hand, and he judged that the murderer was the same person as the previous victim. The CFO's hand had held the handbag containing a large sum of money from the previous case. The bag had been taken away by the murderer. Both of their hands smelled of titanium dioxide. This smell is often found in paintball bags. This shows that the killer or the CFO often plays this game. Sniffer went to the trunk of the car and the victim's body. The forensics officer standing nearby was very surprised when he heard Sniffer conclude that the bag belonged to the killer, because there was no smell of titanium dioxide in the CFO's car. The truth was clear. The CFO and the killer were accomplices. He hid the killer who stole money and killed the boss. Then he came back to blackmail and was killed by the killer. The next step was to catch the killer. Sniffer smelled the distinctive smell of scrap paper and plastic on the bag. There was only one paintball basketball club in the whole city that was open next to the scrap paper and scrap recycling warehouse. The two immediately went there. Victor was responsible for shaking hands with players. Sniffer took the opportunity to sniff around to find someone with a smoking cessation patch. When Sniffer changed his clothes, he smelled a familiar scent. A bald man walked in. There was indeed a smoking cessation patch on his arm. Everyone put on their helmets and entered the field. The smell of titanium dioxide and the sweat of more than 20 players mixed together, making Sniffer unable to tell who the culprit was for a moment. When the game started, Sniffer hid to the side to observe. Suddenly, someone was eliminated. After he took off his helmet, Sniffer identified that person as the culprit. Sniffer had just told Victor to catch the culprit when he was unexpectedly shot by a paintball and eliminated. Sniffer reminded Victor to be careful because the culprit had a weapon on him. Victor quickly chased after the culprit alone. The culprit ran around the steel maze with a bag. Victor climbed up high and jumped down suddenly. Victor finally subdued the culprit. Sniffer had just finished his work when his ex-wife told him some bad news. Alex was arrested by the police on suspicion of murder. Sniffer immediately went to the police station with Victor. The police chief said that Alex had killed a drug dealer. At that time, Alex was standing next to the body with a gun. Sniffer did not believe it at all. Alex had naively confessed to his friend before, so Alex certainly did not have the courage to kill someone. Sniffer wanted to see his son, but was refused. The police chief was afraid that both of them would collude to deny the crime. Sniffer could not bear it any longer, so he removed the nose clip and took a deep breath. Then Sniffer said that the police chief was 45 years old and did not smoke. He had no wife or children because he loved the bees he raised more than anyone. The police chief was shocked to realize that Sniffer was a famous humanoid police dog in the detective world. Sniffer wanted to ask to investigate this case, but he was still determined not to let Sniffer see Alex. Sniffer had no choice but to go to the crime scene with Victor. The neighbor heard the movement from the cat's eye hole, so he secretly observed. Victor immediately used tape to seal the cat's eye. It was illegal for them to investigate a case without permission. Victor took out a lockpick tool and then used steam to melt the glue and peel off the seal. Victor also learned from Sniffer and smelled it and said that this was a seal made of white paper. Sniffer was speechless because it was obvious to the naked eye. At this moment, the neighbor's tape covering the cat's eye suddenly came off. He saw their actions clearly, so he immediately called the police. At this time, two of them had entered Sniffer's house. In the middle of the living room, the scent image was displayed. Alex was indeed here at the time of the murder, but Alex was holding a gun and lying on the ground. It seemed that Alex was unconscious. Sniffer took another deep breath and smelled the scent of the sheriff and two paramedics who had arrived. This was normal. The police were definitely investigating the scene, but Sniffer still felt something was wrong. Sniffer took a deep breath for the third time to get rid of unrelated smells. Sniffer detected the smell of a second gunman. The gunman was a man around 35 to 37 years old. Because the smell at the scene was too complicated, Sniffer couldn't tell whether that person had fired a shot or not. Sniffer smelled flour behind a floor lamp. Sniffer guessed that 3 kilograms of flour had been hidden here. Sniffer speculated that the murderer must have killed someone for the flour and then framed Alex to divert the investigation. After that, two left. The police chief learned from the neighbor that the two were investigating the case on their own, so he immediately called Victor's superior to forbid them from continuing the investigation. The investigation hit a dead end. Sniffer was so worried at home that he couldn't sleep. His ex-wife cried every day. That day, a bald guy suddenly came to Sniffer and said that he was in the same prison as Alex. He said that he knew who the killer was. He wanted $1,000 as a reward. Sniffer smelled Alex's scent on him, so Sniffer went to get the money. The bald guy took the opportunity to sneak up and steal a silver cup. When Sniffer went out, he only gave him $900. The bald guy looked unhappy. Sniffer said the cup he had just stolen was only worth $100. The bald guy had no choice but to return the cup. Sniffer gave the rest of the money. Then the bald guy suddenly knocked Sniffer unconscious. Then he stole all the silver cups. Later, Victor found out, so he immediately took Sniffer to the hospital. The female doctor helped Sniffer clean up the blood in the nasal cavity. The two looked at each other. Sniffer was immediately moved. He held her small hand, but he found that he could not smell the scent on the female doctor. He held the orange next to him and could not smell anything. It was the bald guy who had damaged his nose. Victor then found the bald guy's address. Victor prepared to arrest him to question who the culprit was all along. But when Victor arrived, he found that the bald guy had been killed. This time, the clue was cut off again. Sniffer speculated that the bald guy's appearance was to destroy his sense of smell to hinder the investigation. What was even more surprising was that the police, through ballistic testing, identified Sniffer's son as the culprit. Immediately after that, Victor received a phone call saying that on the day of the murder, the police chief did not come to the scene, but sent another investigation team. team. Sniffer immediately understood that the second gunman was the police chief. That's why Sniffer thought the sheriff was also at the scene at first. The sheriff knew that Sniffer's nose could detect his secret, so he deliberately ordered someone to sabotage Sniffer's sense of smell. He was the real killer who killed the drug dealer. Now, they only needed to find the flower to convict him. Although Sniffer had temporarily lost his sense of smell, his mind was still very sharp. Sniffer knew that the sheriff had a bee farm, so there was a high chance that the flower was hidden there. Then they found a hacker. They disguised themselves as tourists and went to the bee farm. They took the opportunity to visit and install surveillance cameras. Then they also broke the window to trick the neighbors into calling the sheriff to inform them that their bee farm had been robbed. At this time, the hacker had also connected the surveillance cameras. Next was the moment of waiting for the prey to fall into the trap. The police chief received the news and hurried back from elsewhere. He didn't go into the house but went straight to the beehive. Then he opened a beehive and checked the flower package. When he left, he accidentally found a camera, so he immediately realized that he had been set up. Because a surveillance camera had no image due to a bad signal, Sniffer and the others didn't notice the sheriff walking towards them. After collecting the evidence, they were about to leave when the sheriff stopped them. Because he had a gun in his hand, they didn't dare to resist. Fortunately, the hacker was quick-witted and went around behind the sheriff. Then he suddenly opened the box and made a noise. The moment the sheriff turned around, Sniffer immediately jumped in and knocked him down. The police then conducted a comprehensive investigation. Finally, the truth was revealed. The sheriff always covered up for drug dealers to collect protection money. When Alex bought flour, he discovered this secret, so the sheriff decided to kill the person to silence him, hide the flour, and frame Alex. After everything was over, Sniffer rested for a month before his sense of smell recovered. Very quickly, Sniffer received a new case. In a military hospital, 4 soldiers were shot dead in one night. Sniffer first checked the medical staff. Sniffer smelled the doctor on duty. He had just operated on a patient with necrosis, so he had a foul smell on him. Sniffer found the nurse on duty sleeping on the table all night, and she had a cold breath on her. Neither of them were the murderer. Then Sniffer went to the patient's room and took a deep breath. Sniffer smelled the murderer on the victim. The murderer was about 20 to 25 years old and did not take medicine but had drunk alcohol before committing the crime. It was probably to gain the courage to kill. The murderer had scar healing ointment on his body. The director took out prescription records and found out that a soldier had prescribed this ointment. The two went to the barracks to find him. Sniffer did not smell any alcohol on him, so Sniffer immediately dismissed the suspicion. But the soldiers sadly said that they were new recruits from out of town and were often beaten by the head instructor. The two went to the head instructor, but he said there was no bullying. At that time, the head instructor's wife came to ask for money to buy clothes. He immediately acted like he was pampering her, not like a cruel person. The soldiers were still training normally, and no one said they were being bullied. It seemed like someone was lying. They checked the police's ballistics, and it showed that the killer used a TT-type pistol. From then on, after the barracks turned off the lights, the two soldiers went up to the kitchen to drink and eat pickles. They drank until there was only one pickle left. One of them went into the warehouse to get more. At that moment, a masked man dressed in black entered, using a TT pistol with a silencer. This man fired several shots at the soldiers outside. When the soldier in the warehouse heard the gunshots, he quickly locked the door. Killer could not open the door, so he shot to break the lock. When the patrol soldier heard the noise and ran over, the killer had already run away. Only the shot soldier was left lying on the ground. The killer could freely break into the barracks, so he must have had a shortcut. Victor, with the help of the patrol soldier, found an abandoned gate in the back. Anyone could enter and exit from there. Sniffer found a black woolen thread in the kitchen that matched the killer's scent. There was also a smell of synthetic leather on it. This type of leather was often used to make bus seats, and the smell was also very strong. This shows that the killer came to kill people on a new bus. They found this new bus. Maybe they will catch the killer. At the same time, the head coach's wife received a mysterious text message to meet at 6 p.m. He saw that his wife seemed worried, so he asked what was wrong. She said that she had made an appointment with her best friend to go to the movies tonight. This reason was so unusual that he didn't seem to suspect anything. At this time, Sniffer and Victor went to the bus control center and found out that the new bus was still on the road. The two immediately stopped the bus. Victor asked the driver if he had seen a man wearing a black scarf last night. The driver certainly had an impression of that person because the person used a scarf to cover his face and was dressed very conspicuously. Based on the location where this person got off the car, the two found the murderer's house, but there was no one inside. As soon as Sniffer entered, he smelled the scent of a gun. Then, Sniffer also found the black bag that contained the gun and bullets. There was also a diary. It was written that the murderer was a soldier. The diary should have a photo of him and the head coach's wife. At this time, the head coach's kidnapper's wife went to meet the mysterious person that was also the murderer. In addition, the two of them were actually legally married. The head coach had robbed his wife and separated them. He also ordered his subordinates to destroy the husband's face. After escaping, he got involved in revenge and killed the soldiers who had destroyed his face. When the two were kissing, the head coach suddenly appeared. He had already discovered that his wife was panicking when reading the message, so he secretly followed her. He was extremely angry and wanted to kill someone, but the husband suddenly rushed at him and knocked him down. Then he told his wife to run away. However, he was eventually shot dead. The wife fled to an abandoned warehouse. The head coach quickly chased after her. She picked up an iron bar and beat him from behind. Then she kept hitting him. Finally, she beat him to death. The law ruled that she was in self-defense, so she was not arrested. Those who have harmed others will eventually suffer. At this time in the city, a nanny was playing frisbee with a little boy. The frisbee fell to the ground. A man wearing black gloves picked it up and gave it to her. Unexpectedly, he suddenly sprayed her with sleeping gas and took her away. After she passed out, the little boy was also kidnapped. The kidnapper blackmailed the child's father for 120,000 euros. Otherwise, he would kill the hostage. Sniffer felt that the amount of money was very strange. Why did the kidnapper ask for such a small amount of money? The kidnapper only gave them 48 hours to prepare the money. The child's father was a tycoon, so he was not short of money, but he was afraid that the robbers would kill the hostage after taking the money, so he called the police. Sniffer smelled the plate and knew that the kidnapper was a man, but the kidnapper was wearing gloves, so Sniffer could not guess his age or height. However, the plate smelled of a drink. Kidnapper had drunk a drink. Victor immediately sent someone to look for a soda can in a nearby trash can. The father was not satisfied. He said that he had come to solve the case, not to clean up the trash. At this time, the police found the soda can. Sniffer smelled it. Based on the sweat, Sniffer guessed that the kidnapper had gray hair and was about 50 years old. He was a heavy smoker. He smoked at least a pack of cigarettes a day. There is a high concentration of nitrosamine in sweat. It is a carcinogen found in tobacco. There is also a methanethiol smell that smells like rotten eggs. It is a drug used to treat liver disease. Sniffer speculates that the kidnapper is in the final stages of liver cancer because the soda can smells like disinfectant from a private clinic. There is also some kind of spray paint smell. Sniffer is not sure where this smell comes from. He has to go home and do an experiment. Sniffer cuts open the soda can and drops an odor eliminator to extract the spray paint smell. Sniffer immediately thinks of cars. Sniffer calls Victor and says this is Cars spray paint that also smells like mineral oil and kaolin. It is a spray paint specifically for used cars. Victor has a list of patients from the private clinic that is filtered out for liver cancer, gray hair, about 50 years old, combined with the occupational characteristics of a used car dealer. Then they found a patient who had been discharged from the hospital 4 days ago. Victor immediately took action with his subordinates. The store clerk said that the boss had gone to the airport half an hour ago. She then provided the license plate number and the time of his flight. Victor immediately contacted the airport to request that the plane not take off. Then, Victor drove to block his way. Victor asked the man why he kidnapped the child. He was confused and asked which child. He said that he had been at his son's house in Los Angeles for the past 3 days. He had the plane ticket as evidence. Victor realized that he had kidnapped the wrong person. So who was the real kidnapper? Soon after, the father of the kidnapped child received a threatening letter from the kidnapper. Inside was a lock of hair. Sniffer smelled the hair. It was indeed the child's hair. Sniffer smelled the letter again. It smelled of the leaves of the Polish basil. This plant was quite rare and did not grow in the city. It usually only grew in the suburbs. Sniffer guessed from the smell on the letter that the kidnapper's liver disease had improved, as if it was about to be cured. But how could that be? Even after surgery, he couldn't have recovered so quickly in such a short time. There was also the smell of Japanese tea, but there were countless places that sold Japanese tea. They couldn't check every single place. The father of the kidnapped child was worried because the kidnapper demanded that he hand over the money before 4 p.m. or else the kidnapper would kill the hostage. Victor started investigating from the sender. The letter was sent by the nanny. This showed that she was related to the kidnapper. The police discovered that the nanny had also been to a Japanese restaurant, and that was where the smell of Japanese tea came from. The two immediately went to the Japanese restaurant to investigate. After they took out the nanny's photo and asked the manager, he said that the nanny used to come to see a tea master. This shop used to be owned by him, but was bought by the father of the kidnapped child half a year ago. Victor entered this person's information into the patient list, but the result was only a female patient. Married women usually take their husband's last name. It turned out that the patient with liver cancer was actually the kidnapper's wife. The two of them immediately went to the private clinic, but they found that the female patient had already been discharged from the hospital. But they were lucky to find a hair hair clip. Sniffer discovered that the smell on the plate and the envelope came from the female patient. At the same time, after they left, the manager of the Japanese restaurant immediately called the father of the kidnapped child. He immediately knew that his old rival was the kidnapper. However, no one knew this person's address. Only the nanny had contacted him. The father of the kidnapped child immediately went to the nanny to ask for the address, but she refused to say anything. At this moment, the nanny's phone rang. It turned out that the kidnapper had called. The father of the kidnapped child immediately asked someone to find the location of the phone number. Then Sniffer and Victor also arrived. At this time, the nanny no longer hid the truth. It turned out that her father, the kidnapper, and the father of the kidnapped child were business partners in the past. Later, the business of the father of the kidnapped child grew stronger and stronger, forcing her father and the kidnapper to sell the company to him at the lowest price. Her father could not bear this life, so he finally sought death. At that time, the kidnapper's wife was suffering from cancer, so he urgently needed money for medical treatment. In order to avenge her father, the nanny cooperated with the kidnapper to kidnap his son to spend money. The truth was finally revealed. The kidnapper had booked 2 plane tickets and was hastily arranging for his wife and child to leave. Unexpectedly, the father of the kidnapped child arrived in time. He rushed in and punched the kidnapper, then strangled him, wanting to kill him. The kidnapper's wife quickly pretended to hit him on the head with a beer bottle. He then slapped her. He picked up the gun, wanting to kill her and blame the kidnapper. At the critical moment, Sniffer and Victor arrived in time to prevent the tragedy from happening. The next morning, Sniffer was leisurely drinking coffee at home when he suddenly received a mysterious package. There was no sender information on it. After opening it, he found a box containing a pen and a piece of paper. Sniffer picked it up and smelled it, but there was no scent. This was strange. He opened the paper and saw that it only had 3 words written on it: "Save her." Sniffer immediately called Victor for help. Although the letter had no scent, the silver pen had a scent. It came from a blonde woman about 25 to 30 years old. The pen also had the scent of a horse stable and paper money. The two of them immediately went to the horse stable to investigate. After Sniffer smelled the body, he was puzzled because there was no other person's scent on the body. While Sniffer was at a loss for what to do, the murderer suddenly called Sniffer and said that her death was all because of him. Sniffer had disappointed him so much, but perhaps Sniffer still had time to save the second person. Sniffer was extremely angry. This murderer was clearly targeting Sniffer, but Sniffer didn't know what his purpose was. Victor found the second box at the scene. Sniffer sniffed it, but he still didn't smell anything. The box still contained a piece of paper and a pen. The note said he was somewhere nearby. It was probably the second target. The pen smelled like a mixture of engine oil and gasoline. This was the typical smell of a motorboat engine. There was also the stench of rotten wood and plankton. This was a type of algae that grew in lakes or ponds. It seemed that the second target was the boatman. There was also the smell of hair conditioner on the pen. Sniffer guessed that the target was about 50 years old and had gray hair. Sniffer sniffed again and found that there was also the smell of grilled meat. The second target was probably near a barbecue restaurant. The two immediately went to the nearest lake, boat, and barbecue restaurant and asked the owner of the boat company. They finally found out where the target lived. However, there was only a dog in the house and no one else. Sniffer finally found the second target dead in a small wooden boat. This time, too, there was no other person's scent on the victim. Could the killer be the person Sniffer had sent to prison before? And was he taking revenge on Sniffer now? At this time, the killer changed his phone number to call Sniffer. He said that Sniffer was increasingly disappointing him. He gave Sniffer another chance. If Sniffer couldn't save the third person, he would definitely make Sniffer's life a living hell. Sniffer didn't want to be passive anymore, so the two of them contacted the police to look up the sender's information, but they couldn't find anything. The package seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The sender's phone number couldn't be traced either, because the killer used a different number every time. To ensure Sniffer's safety, Victor and his bodyguards protected him 24/7. The third package was quickly delivered. There was still no scent on the paper, but the scent on the pen indicated that the third target was a middle-aged man, around 30 to 35 years old. There was a smell of propylene glycol and monochloramine. Propylene glycol is used to make antifreeze. Monochloramine is a strong deodorant. Shoe deodorants are made from it. Combining these clues, Sniffer deduced that the target was working at an ice skating rink. Ice skating shoes would use deodorants inside. There was also a distinctive scent of briar, a type of wood used to make pipes. The place where the pipes and ice skating rink also existed was definitely a shopping mall. The police immediately located the location and took Sniffer there. They quickly went to the skate rental counter. There was a blonde woman working. Victor had someone monitor the crowd passing by. This time, they wanted to catch the killer. At this time, the killer called again, asking Sniffer if the pizza was good. Sniffer's nose nose was getting more and more useless because he was looking in the wrong place. It seemed that the third person would also die because of Sniffer. After the killer hung up, a piercing scream rang out in the mall. The police rushed over and saw a gagged employee in the corner. He was an electrician at the mall. The attacker had snatched his work uniform and put it on. Then he went back to the beauty salon. Only then did Sniffer react. Propylene glycol can also be used in the beauty industry. Everyone immediately rushed over. They found that the third target had been murdered. There was a box next to the body. Sniffer opened it and saw a sentence written on the paper. "You killed her." Sniffer angrily tore the paper to pieces and ran out with a megaphone, shouting, "I'll find you and kill you, you bastard." But the killer had already escaped. Seeing the victims die one by one made Sniffer decide he was no longer a detective. Sniffer went home and researched all night and finally found out why the paper had no smell. However, he had come up with a way to deal with it. But even if Sniffer didn't want to be a detective anymore, the killer wouldn't let him go. The fourth delivery box was sent to the police station. Sniffer went to remove the outer packaging and used a new odor enhancer he had created to make the paper smell like zinc resin. This was a deodorant the killer had used to make the letters smellless. This time the smell on the pen came from an 8 or 9-year-old girl who was studying dance at an art school. Since the pen smelled of wood, the school was definitely near a woodworking shop. There was also the smell of conifers. Victor quickly determined the location of the art school in the suburbs, but two men. The same thing happened at the mall, so Sniffer sprayed some of his scent enhancer on the pen. Sniffer found that the scent of the conifer was redundant. It was something the killer had intentionally applied to trick Sniffer, so Sniffer deduced the opposite. Sniffer was certain that the art school was in the city. This time Sniffer finally managed to save the girl before the killer could strike. But this time, the killer did not call. Sniffer sniffed the paper carefully. The scent gradually spread. Sniffer finally determined that the killer was the first delivery man. Because Sniffer smelled the delivery man's pen, it smelled the same as the first pen. Victor immediately determined the killer's address. But when everyone arrived, the killer had already escaped. However, they found a poster of Sniffer on the wall. Sniffer's eyes and nostrils in the photo were punctured. It seemed that he hated Sniffer very much. At this time, the killer finally called. Victor also asked the hacker to determine the killer's location. Under the killer's instructions, Sniffer got the fifth pen. Sniffer picked it up and smelled it. Sniffer was surprised because it was the smell of the female doctor who had treated his rhinitis. Sniffer could no longer calm down. Sniffer said, "If you dare to touch her, I will make you die without a burial place." But the killer was not afraid. He told Sniffer to go alone to save the people. Otherwise, he would kill the hostage. Victor could only send people to secretly surround him. Sniffer put on a Bluetooth headset and a bulletproof vest and went to an abandoned gym. The female doctor was tied to a chair. Sniffer was about to rush to save her when he saw the killer appear. The killer was in a sniper position, so the police had no way to lock on to the target. Victor immediately told Sniffer to take 2 steps back to lead the killer out. But this action was discovered by him. He retreated to a blind spot and said, "You're smart, but I'm smarter." He thought that everyone in this world was trash and filth. For example, the girl Sniffer saved, she had muscular dystrophy. Even though she was saved, she wouldn't live long. The previous victims were either prostitutes or drug addicts. They all deserved to die. He thought he was helping the world get rid of mold and weeds. But the killer felt that being so smart was lonely, so he played cat and mouse with Sniffer. Sniffer took a deep breath and said, "You've been living alone for the past 10 years, and no woman has ever liked you. You're a failure. You're the trash. You're the trash of this world." The killer was so angry that he ran out and pointed a gun at Sniffer. He said, "You're the trash. A freak like you shouldn't exist in this world." Although the killer had gone out of the blind spot, he was hidden by the architecture. The shooter also saw him holding a bomb detonator. He then gave it to Sniffer and said that as long as Sniffer was 10 meters away from the female doctor, the bomb on her body would explode. Then he ran away, but Sniffer felt that the detonator inside had no electricity, so it couldn't detonate the bomb. Sniffer realized he had been tricked, so he turned around and chased after the killer. Victor finally ran over, but he only saw Sniffer sitting on the ground. Killer was dead. Then Sniffer calmly left. The female doctor was finally rescued safely. That's all the content of the movie The Sniffer. Today's movie ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.